Hi and welcome to Life, the Universe and Music. I'm Craig Westwood. Recording is something that I've done since I was a young child. I had quite humble beginnings really, as many people did in the 60s and 70s, using a domestic recording machine. So no, I didn't have a Revox A77 to begin on, or a Studer A810, or a Nagra 4 even. No, our family machine in the Midlands UK in the mid-60s was one of these, a BSR reel-to-reel called a Civic. Switch it on and it rumbles, and the push play and stop lever used to nearly break your fingers. But much of my early memories musically were songs my big brother Andy recorded on it. The Beatles, The Who, Simon and Garfunkel, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, Pink Floyd, and this quite crude microphone was my first introduction to the wider world of recording. When cassette recorders became popular in the 70s, I was bought for Christmas one of these. I recorded stuff from TV and radio using one of those. It wasn't great quality, but all kids I knew used to record this way, those that had one. As time went on, I learnt to refine the quality of those recordings. If it was on radio, I discovered I could record direct output by cable. I'd use a microphone for any spoken stuff. As I got older, the equipment got better. My cassette machines got bigger. I worked for a camera and hi-fi store on a Saturdays. With the money I earned, this was usually spent on music too, whether vinyl records or hi-fi separates. I bought my first good guitar in 1980, a second-hand Eco E20, which I still have. It's in the background. My prized recorder of the early 80s was a TIAC 108 sync, which I think was a forerunner to the Tascam Porta Studio. Not just a stereo recorder, you could synchronise the left and right channels, so you could overdub two instruments, and then add a live vocal in the middle. I used to record this to a second cassette machine. Yeah, very noisy, especially if you did this too many times. It was when I got the A108 sync that I started to make recordings of my own songs and wrote some of my first on that. After this, I started college in Yorkshire and was introduced to loads of tape equipment there. TIAC 4-track reel-to-reel machines like the A3340, the A3440 and the Tascam 34. I also got myself a placement in the studio of TV composer Edward Williams in my second year in Bristol. I did this with my friend Will Pilbeam. Ed had Soundcraft gear, including the 2-inch 8-track reel-to-reel and a bank of EMS synthesizers, models like the VCS3, the Putney, the Polyphonic, and many other bits of studio gear. He heard some of the stuff we were producing, and I think he kind of understood our equipment limitations, and he pointed out just how difficult it was going to be keeping hiss out of the recordings and how we needed to record tracks just right to minimise this. An early intro we had to gain staging. I'll talk about Edward again in a future episode, I think. Later, as the Tascam Porta Studio was introduced, college bought one of the clones as the market caught on, a Clarion. In my third and final college year in 1984, I used this machine to write more songs. After college, I joined the Electronic Arts Workshop, run by video maker Brian Johnson and musician Rick Cocker. We did video work mostly, and I ran some darkroom photography courses, but I used to spend all my spare time there making and recording songs. Here I was introduced to the Atari ST, MIDI and sequencing. Eventually I bought my own ST machine and some music software to go with it called Cubeat. This was a cut down version of Cubase, which I later progressed onto. At this point I was writing songs at home, I was making some basic MIDI backing tracks, taking them to Rick's home studio and adding guitar and vocal on top. Recording then onto Rick's Tascam 38. I bought my own tapes, so I still have those. I'm hugely grateful to Rick because he was a great enthusiast for the technology, especially the Atari ST, and I learnt a lot from him. I spent a lot of Sundays at Rick's. He'd let me use his studio, mostly on my own, with a bit of help if I got stuck. This led me though to think about starting my own setup, and eventually I bought my own second-hand Tascam 244 and a baby Casio CZ101. And here's where I became independent. I still use some old Tandy, that's Radio Shack in the US, dynamic mics for a while. Over time, as and when I could afford it though, I added more gear. A Yamaha RX21 drum machine, and a Yamaha REX50 FX machine, which I used as my effects bus. A Yamaha TX81Z, a rack version of the DX series. I borrowed keyboards where I could, a Casio CZ3000, a KY-K11, or is it KY? KY or KY? I don't know. They all conjure up different mental pictures, don't they? A Roland U220, an EMU Proteus 2 orchestral rack. The last two I eventually bought, but for years I became a hobbyist, much because of my previous mentioned disasters on stage in the mid-80s. So I made music for fun and family as my kids were born and grew up. I built my own PCs at that time, and I bought Cubases, and then Cubases VST, a number of versions of those. I had a variety of different sound cards, the Aztec Labs Sound Galaxy Basic 16, a Wave Power card. This progressed onto the Sound Blaster series, the AWE32, or AWE32, which contained a synth chip based on the EMU 8000. Then the AWE64, and then the Sound Blaster Live series cards, which I had quite a few of. These were great because you could record and manipulate your own samples and save them in Sound Blaster's Sound Font SF format. Composing tunes and the odd song or two, recording digitally now onto PC. I was still doing a day job as a graphic designer. But in 2005, I then bought an iMac G5, and I initially moved on to GarageBand. Then, big change. I moved to Apple's Logic Studio, later to become Logic Pro, especially when I realised that a lot of my SF samples could be converted to the EXS samples in Logic. I bought an Alesis Multimix 8 and a Sennheiser dynamic mic, which improved my vocal recordings quite well. It got to 2011 when I realised my old analogue tapes should now be digitised before I lost them forever. Ampex tapes, as I had, were notorious for shedding, and if you've got old tapes and want to play them again without losing all of the oxide, because tape, quite simply, is a magnetised compound of rust, stroke, iron oxide and glue. The glue over time deteriorates and it sheds all the oxide particles. It's really worth reading the online blog, by the way. If I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a tape by Eddie Siletti. I'll put a link in below because that explains about tape baking, which is a great way to rejuvenate your tapes for a while in order to let you sample off the tracks. The cassette stuff on the 244 fared better. These were TDK, ultimately much better than the more expensive Ampex. I bought an M-Audio Profire 2626 interface and a Tascam TSR 8 track, and set about the conversion of my tapes from rigs. I also managed to get hold of a TIAC A3440 4-track to digitise what survived of my older college stuff. Mostly for posterity really, but who knows? It might be used in a track someday, in some form. Here, the Profire 2626 was great for this task, and I could record up to 8 tracks simultaneously. However, long story short, and this was my pet peeve about M-Audio Tech, they stopped supporting driver upgrades in 2016-17. So I was forced to stop using what was, I thought, a good piece of hardware. I now have a UA Apollo Twin-X interface running alongside Logic Pro, and I'm not going to use M-Audio again. The Twin-X is an excellent piece of equipment though, and for 2 tracks at least, it's great for most of my recording needs as a singer-songwriter. The greatest investment recently for me though was in microphones. These have helped me greatly in recording better sound. Matthew and Andrew, I mentioned previously, of 360 Artist Development, provided me with some courses in recording and mixing, which I found addressed many issues for me, including some practical exercises which Matthew listened to and marked and critiqued. And here on, from that, the journey continues. I'm constantly interested in gear, old and new, that'll add quality to my music, and I'm also planning to feature a few items in future episodes as they appear. I hope you enjoy this one. Please like and subscribe if you find these videos helpful, and please leave me a comment below if you have any questions, and share if you think this will be of some interest to others. Obviously, sharing will help this channel to grow. And ring the bell if you want to be notified when the next one is out. Till then, cheers my dears.